All right. Welcome to She Does Tech. I'm Rachel Curran, and I am here with Heather Boveri. We're here to tell the stories of women in tech and the careers that they are in, especially those who are in careers where women are generally underrepresented. Heather and I have worked together in the past, and she is very humble about what she does, but she's incredibly good at what she does. And so tell me a little bit about what does it mean to be a senior manager of engineering? What do you do on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so my job is essentially just to try to make everyone else's jobs a lot easier and to take a lot of the interrupt work that would normally derail a developer or that would block a developer. Unblocker is my main overall role, whether that means making sure that we know who a stakeholder is, or we get a dependency, or we find an issue before it ships to production. Like it can mean anything in terms of an engineering sprint or any kind of work around it, planning or the day to day stuff too. What I typically end up doing in an actual day is a lot of meetings with a big variety of people. Sometimes I get some time to troubleshoot issues. Sometimes I get some time to code review. Sometimes I'm doing more team oriented things like planning. Sometimes I'm meeting with customers, and sometimes I'm trying to identify why something is a problem in our process. It all just really depends on the circumstance. That variety is something that I really enjoy. I think it's something that is constantly providing me a challenge and lets me have a big impact across a broad group of people in a bunch of small different ways that I think really add up to the overall efficiency in an organization.
That's pretty amazing because you just said it as a variety, but that takes a lot of different skills, talking with customers, being in meetings, troubleshooting the actual technical issues, foreseeing problems. So what's your background? How did you end up in this role? Not just, I would love to hear your career path, but
Mhm.
also there's Heather behind that, right? There's something about you and what you like and what you love that got you to that place too. So tell me a little bit about how you landed here.
Yeah, well, I think like a lot of people, I had a lot of luck. I just kept doing things that I was really enjoying, and that led me into this career path. I have a pretty traditional background in that I got a CS degree, a bachelor's, and then I went into my first job out of college and then kind of started as a software developer, became a team lead, then started a software developer at another company, and then started taking on more management responsibilities. For me, what I found, because I've ended up being a manager at a couple of different places after being a developer, was that I was always drawn to kind of breadth over depth. So I would hop into a problem just because I was really curious, or I would ask a bunch of questions, or I would try to find something out, why this project worked this way. And I just tried to ask those questions. And then when there were opportunities to do things like work on new projects or to help out with something, I just took those opportunities. And that was something that I, again, feel very lucky I had. I think that the breadth over depth is something that is more of a personal thing. You mentioned the Heather part of it. I think a lot of people in software development like the focus time and really like to power through a problem. For me, I kind of like that small doses of adrenaline, adrenaline or something, that like small bit of satisfaction for moving something forward. Maybe that is resolving a support issue, or maybe that's having a conversation that needs to be had, or maybe that's, oh, we figured out that we're going to need to do this thing that we didn't anticipate before. We need to make sure we plan for that work. Doing all those little things, I can do a bunch of those in a day, and that really makes me feel very fulfilled. Whereas I think as a developer, while I was solving a lot of problems, it took a little bit longer to get to that point. And it often could be a little bit more isolating because I was so focused on one issue. So I think that's what really drew me into more of the management and into more of kind of poking my head into a variety of different things. I think that that's why I've ended up where I am and kind of how I got there.
Do you, when you say you like that small bit of adrenaline or that kind of quick resolution, am I hearing right that part of that is that you like to help solve problems for other people, kind of that unblocker? Because you said that early on, the unblock, right? And is that something that drives you, or is that just a part of what ends up happening?
Definitely. Like, I don't think I would get nearly as much satisfaction if I was just, solving a bunch of leak code problems during a day. Like, ultimately, some of my happiest moments are when I figure out not just something that was causing an issue, but knowing that solving of an issue results in the customer getting to be told, oh, this is resolved, or this is now fixed, or like kind of closing that loop, closing that thread, and understanding the root cause and what we could do to prevent that in the future. I think that full cycle can come really quickly when you're kind of bouncing across a bunch of different things. And helping people is a big part of that. I think that that could be helping someone through a code review, or that could be doing an onboarding or a training. That could be any number of things. And I get to be involved in a pretty big variety. I like to say that I make a little bit of progress in a lot of things. And that tends to be my goal day to day, just a to-do list of items and thinking up what I need to think about next and just staying ahead of it.
Solving the engineering problems is a very different thing than, say, managing a team. Yet,
Mm-hmm.
I think someone's a crossover there. So how does that apply, those things you love of kind of that unblock and the little bits at a time of, getting iterating, I guess. How does that relay over to managing a team?
Yeah, I think there's there's engineering problems and there's people problems, right? Like I think you can't solve engineering problems without people being happy, without people seeing their place in the team, identifying with the team, having a clear sense of ownership, and being able to solve their own problems, empowering them. And when I'm working with people, being able to help them grow, being able to see that they are solving problems themselves, solving much bigger problems than I know I could solve myself. It's really just a way to see that my impact really is something that, while it may be small in the moment, it can help others have a really large impact, because I work with so many amazing engineers who are really good at going and solving the really hard problems. And while I'm certainly not a big part of that, I think that I can help in the little ways that do make their jobs a little easier day to day. The people stuff, the engineering stuff, at the end of the day, it is all just solving problems.
That's a very fair way to put it. It's funny, I'll just share with you that as Sarah and Alyssa and I talked about this a little bit, and we were just talking about our own careers, we realized that all three of us do things that we love. And part of how we got there was just that, what you said, like you see the problem and you go after it. And if you have that behavior, I think it helps you get to where you want to be, because you're going to go after the problem that interests you, right? So if you're able to solve those problems, then that helps you grow into the career you want. What advice do you have if there's some girl out there who's 15 years old and thinking someday I want to do that? Do you think it's important that the education that you've had or certain things that you've done, you've mentioned just a lot of things can help, but I've heard you also mention several times without a lot of detail on it that like you've seen those opportunities and you've taken them. Um,
Mhm.
can you talk a little bit about, some advice for those folks? What would you suggest doing or things that you think are important?
Yeah. So one of the things that, when maybe I was younger, I was either less aware of, or maybe there was a little bit less availability for, there is so much education out there that is so available to people right now online, like so much free stuff you can kind of dig into, and you can lean into your interests too. So much open source code on the web that you can go kind of learn about, whether that's finding a plugin in some tool that you're really interested in contributing to, or maybe you really like music and you want to find like an open source music player or something like that. I really wish I'd done more of that. I don't think there's one way to go into tech. And I think that a lot of people may follow a traditional path like I did, but there's still a lot of other ways to get into tech. And I think, like you said, if you're doing something that you like, oftentimes opportunities will present themselves. And I think if you start to do something, if you start to learn, you'll be able to find some of those opportunities. You'll make good connections and you'll put yourself out there and find something. Maybe that's you join any of the wonderful different kinds of organizations there are out there for people to meet each other. Like there's meetups all the time for people that are interested in different frameworks, or people that are interested in mentorship or getting mentored. I did a little bit of that as well in the past couple of years, and that was always a really good experience to kind of walk people through learning a little bit of Python or putting their first website up there. And there's a lot of those kinds of opportunities out there if you look. I think that you only find stuff out like that when you spend the time kind of hands on. And when it comes to software development, there's a lot that you can do just taking a tutorial or something that will let you get a bit of a feel for what the coding piece is actually like. And if you want to start working with a team or get used to what software development in process is, then there's a lot of open source repos where there's issues on GitHub that people can just volunteer to help out with. And there's a lot of things out there like that that can get you started.
I love that. I wonder, you mentioned earlier asking a lot of questions, and then you've been talking about, going out and just exploring and trying things. I think that often people who haven't done something before, if you're breaking in new, we always hear the term imposter syndrome, which I'm not going to get into, but there's often that kind of self-doubt or that shyness to ask questions if you don't know things and you're in the room. And it's my opinion from having worked in tech long enough that that's actually really valued when you walk in a room and you ask questions. People, there's tends to be fewer people saying, giving you that look that that was a dumb question and more people wanting to bring you forward. Is that your experience? And do you find that, when you say asking those questions, do you ever hesitate that I should know this? Why am I asking it? Or do you just go for it? What's your...
I think for many, many years, I hesitated before every question. I think a lot of people do. I often, when I'm onboarding a new person, I try to explicitly tell them, I expect you to ask questions. That is the expectation. Any new person joining anywhere or starting a new thing is going to have questions. So, really letting people know that that is expected, I think, can help. And I feel like I hesitated a lot and I was very introverted and struggled a lot to ask for help. But over time, I actually think that I, while it's not necessarily true that I think my confidence has increased, my, I guess, memory of any other time where I've asked a question and felt a little bit like, oh, why did I ask that? I just figured it out the second after I hit enter, or oh man, I should have asked that a different way. I barely remember those instances, and having asked so many questions, it all blurs in my mind. And so I don't hesitate as much anymore. Because at the end of the day, I know everybody has questions, and I've seen excellent engineers ask questions and then be like, oh my gosh, like I figured it out right now.
Yeah.
And once you see people that you really admire and really trust figure things out live, like it's kind of an incredible feeling to know that like you're not alone. I've seen engineers who, again, are really, really excellent get stumped by, the stray semicolon or, oh no, that variable was just named incorrectly. And that moment when you just see like, oh yeah, we're all human. No one is perfect. I'm certainly not. But you can be a really good engineer and still make like random mistakes. And in the grand scheme of things, it rarely matters.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And I think you just said it like it's something that is very cool about you as a manager and an important thing is just setting forth the like, ask questions and it's okay to, it's good to communicate. If you make mistakes or don't know something, the only way to grow, and that's for the team, not just for the person, right, is to ask those questions and to own the mistake and figure it out together. And I think that's really cool. I wanted to ask you, so something that we are asking most people who we're doing these interviews with is you're in tech, and so obviously you enjoy it. What is your first memory related to tech? What was that first thing that struck you and got you interested?
I have such a bad memory. Again, because I took like the college route ultimately, like I didn't really get into tech in college. If I was to try to come up with my earliest memory of like actually working on something more technical, I did have like one class in high school that we were doing like Dreamweaver and something else that I don't even remember at this point, but I remember um, in that class, I was able to work ahead pretty quickly. And I just really enjoyed the feeling of kind of cranking through those problems and being able to just like do that myself and kind of solve the problem. And I wasn't good at it or anything, but it was something where I could read and learn. And like a lot of it felt fun, I guess, in that sense. Um, and like looking back on it, it feels really silly, but the times in my life when I've been able to solve even like the smallest problems, I felt a lot of satisfaction and like an improvement in my own confidence. What really drew me was that problem solving aspect. When I was in college, I didn't start in CS. I really didn't even think about it or know it. I actually had my first semester in architecture, And what drew me to that was I really liked the idea of making things and designing things. But when I got into architecture and going through some of the classes, I found that it was very subjective in a lot of cases. The design element was really, really high. And I found that I would spend a lot of time on a problem and didn't feel like I was really solving it. It was just a much higher barrier to getting to that like moment of happiness. And so after that, I looked into other potential majors, and finance was an option and engineering was one. And I took a couple of classes and found that I really enjoyed the programming ones. So that's essentially how I got in.
I love it. I think you definitely fit in the engineering world. I see you excel there. I wonder if you have any advice in particular just out to the world for, I know we talked about kind of how to get into tech, but is there anything that if you were gonna hire someone tomorrow, you'd say like, show me this thing that you can do. And I'm not saying that means necessarily a technical thing. Maybe that's asking questions, but what is it that you'd say like just go master this or bring this to the table?
I think something that is really underestimated in any real role where you're working with a lot of different people is communication. This is something I know that like you're super familiar with and really, really strong at yourself, Rachel. But you're working with others all the time as part of an organization, and people think of, like coding as super heads down, and it certainly is. But there's a lot of communication to it. There's a lot of documenting your changes. There's a lot of, hey, figuring out that you're going to need to work through this problem and then communicating that appropriately, of making different proposals that you have to put together. And there's actually a lot more than you would anticipate of that day to day communication. I think I end up talking a lot during the day to a lot of different people over async communication, written communication, in person, via video chat communication. And I think one of the most valuable skill sets is to just be really good at articulating your point and coming across as someone who's really interested in learning, and making sure that you are open minded and communicating that in anything that you're doing.
I love that. Couldn't agree more. Well, Heather, it has been such a pleasure to chat with you, and thank you for participating in She Does Tech. I think this is awesome.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Rachel.
All right.